Good evening, book lovers. Welcome to another episode of Cath-Lit Live. I am your host, Amy Cattapan. You can find me everywhere on social media under my pen name for my children's books. So that's AJ Cattapan. If you're new here, what we do on Cath-Lit Live is we chat with Catholic authors who have new books that have just released. I'm really excited about tonight's guest and her new book, Stories of the Eucharist, which fits really well with where I just was this past weekend, and that was the National Eucharistic Congress in Indianapolis. If you're not following me on Instagram, go on over there because I'll be sharing more videos and stories in the days to come because there's just so much to process from that Congress. Ran into my old buddy, Alessandro, one of the co-founders of the Hallow app. If you haven't tried the Hallow app yet, please go check them out at hallow.app/cathlitlive. So tonight, though, we are talking with actually the editor for a book that I authored. We're going to be talking to the wonderful woman who helped me with A Saint Squad for Teachers. She was my editor for that project. And I'm so excited to talk with her tonight about her own book, Stories of the Eucharist. So tonight we are talking with Heidi Saxton, who is a Catholic convert, wife, and mother, whose own journey to the Catholic Church was driven by her discovery of the Eucharist. She has a master's degree in theology from Sacred Heart Seminary in Detroit, and for almost 30 years has been helping hundreds of Catholic authors write their stories of faith. She just joined the staff at Sophia Institute Press as a development editor, having been at Ave Maria Press for 8 years, which, like I said, is where she edited my book, A Saint Squad for Teachers. So please help me welcome Heidi Saxton. Hello, Heidi.
Hi, Amy. So nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I am so happy to have you on with me. So we are here tonight to talk about Stories of the Eucharist, your new book from OSV. Give us the little 30-second elevator pitch. What do people need to know about your new book?
Sure. This book has got 40 stories of saints and seekers, saints and special stories of dynamic encounters where Jesus and his Eucharistic presence touched people's lives. For me, just given my backstory, the greatest miracles are really the ones that you can't touch and see. They're the ones that take place inside the heart. And so I share in the introduction my conversion story for those of you who are interested in how I came to understand the Eucharist as Jesus's presence, really truly there for me as I was trying to reach out to him. And I wound up being able to teach both my children and ultimately my mother and leading her into the church as well. So it was a 3-generation miracle. It was pretty exciting. Anyway, this book has 40 stories that families can share with their kids. It covers a wide range of different ages and so forth, and has questions that go with each of the stories that you can talk around the dining room table and just share your own faith.
Yeah, I think I even posted on Facebook when I started reading it that after I got through the introduction and read your own like personal conversion story, I was like, oh, I'm only in the introduction. I'm crying already. Heidi, what are you doing in this book? It was really, really beautifully shared. So I was so glad that you shared that story. But you do have all these different stories in here. And I know you said that the most recent one, which is 2022, which happened at a parish in Mexico, you kind of found a connection between that and the National Eucharistic Congress that you and I were both at this past weekend. So talk to us about that miracle in 2022 and then how that ties into the National Eucharistic Congress.
Sure. Well, one of the things that is, I don't know if you actually were part of the procession. I wasn't able to walk it because of my knee trouble, but watching the scores of people after people after people walking down and celebrating Jesus and their faith in Jesus in the Eucharist. I was just watching them and just so amazed at this outpouring of 50,000 vital, radiant Catholics. And I remember in reading the story of the beating heart of Jesus, Our Lady of the Rosary Parish in 2022, the bishop was initially approached about, whether this was in fact a miracle, whether this was an authentic miracle. And he said something that stuck with me. Um, he said that our faith does not depend on supernatural manifestations. Rather, for the church, in each Eucharist that is celebrated, Jesus becomes really and truly present in the consecrated bread and the consecrated wine, regardless of whether it bleeds, palpitates, or doesn't palpitate. Which was like he was not going to take us out and say, yes, this is indeed a miracle, but he taught something that was a much deeper truth, which is Jesus is really and truly with us, even if you don't see anything different. St. Catherine of Siena, if you read my chapter on St. Catherine of Siena, she talks about approaching Jesus with the eyes of faith and tasting him with the tongue of faith. And everything that it's not a necessarily physical manifestation. It goes much deeper. And that was what we saw going on at the NEC this year. Those people that were touched with eyes of faith and ears of faith, and they saw Jesus in a very profoundly personal and transformative way. That's what I'm hoping to accomplish through this book as well, is to help people really love Jesus by reading this book and hearing these stories of people whose lives were touched as a result of encountering him in the Eucharist.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of FOMO going around for people who didn't get to the National Eucharistic Congress this past weekend. But as I was reflecting this weekend, I was thinking about, yes, it is beautiful to be there, kneeling in adoration with like 50,000 other people, with beautiful music playing and everything. But Jesus is present to us in so many ways, and especially in the Eucharist, which is happening in every Catholic church around the world. And so for those people who are maybe missing out, I kind of want to say you're not really, like, yes, it was great, but Jesus is present to us, in every church that we go to. So, and I think your stories also help people to understand that miracle that's happening all around the world every day. All right, well, let's talk a bit more about your own experience with miracles. You had mentioned your conversion story is in the introduction, but I understand there's also a miracle story having to do with your mother. Tell us about that.
My mother is a good woman, and she dearly loved Jesus with all her heart. She still does. She also was raised and continued to believe that Catholics are not Christians because, you have a laundry list of things that they believe about Catholics, 99% of which are generally not true. But at one point, she told me that I could marry a Catholic boy or I could go to heaven. But I couldn't do both because the Bible says not to be unequally yoked with unbelievers, which does, but that's not what it
Yeah.
means, right? And and so for years and years, like after I became Catholic in 1994, she had my name pinned to the bulletin board at her parish for her daughter who had fallen away from the faith. And for years after that, she was just so um, she was just so grieving that she had lost a daughter that had become a heretic in her mind.
Yeah.
And no matter how I tried talking to her, she tried to have me deprogrammed. She had a lady over her house who was kept whipping Bible verses at me, and I had gone through Bible school at that point, and I had started getting my master's degree in theology. And so I was saying, well, let's take a look at this and look at this. And I was refuting her points, and my mother would just burst into tears and ran from the room because she was so sure. She had prayed that this woman would change my mind, and that wasn't happening. It was just so painful for her.
Yeah.
So fast forward years later, and I married Craig a few more later, and she became very ill, and my dad couldn't take care of her anymore. And so she came to live with me. And so for 3 years, just before COVID, she came to stay at my house. And she would go with us every week to church. She would stay in her seat when it was time to receive the Eucharist. But after about a year of that, she stood up and I said, Mom, where are you going? She says, well, I'm going to go join your church. And that was how you joined somebody's church in her mind. You go up to the front and to the altar call, and then it's a done deal. And I said, well, that's wonderful. Why don't we go talk to the pastor afterwards? And pastor talked to me and he said, well, Heidi, you have the training that you need to prepare your mother. Go home and take care of her and teach her what she needs to know. And when she's done, let me know and we'll give her the sacraments. And so every night my mom said, get out your Catholic books, Heidi. If I'm going to do this, I have to know what I'm getting into. And so I read several of the more popular books that she was able to grasp. And about a month later, she contracted pneumonia and wound up in the hospital. And it really looked like she was going to pass. So I called the priest, and he came and gave her the sacraments. And I'll never forget seeing her eyes light up in receiving Jesus for the first time. It was like the greatest gift of her life. And I looked at that and I realized that I was in the presence of a miracle. There was really no way to explain what was just going on. And it was a miracle because it healed our relationship. It changed the way that she looked at me and the way that I uh, worshiped and the way that I prayed. And it just healed just so many other of the family fractures that had gone on, that it was all because of Jesus and her witnessing that truth of Jesus in the Eucharist every week, that when we brought her to church with us, it compelled her to listen and that softened her heart and brought her closer to him. So, 84 years old, you don't expect people to change that much at that age, but
Yeah.
Jesus had plans for my mother, and it was really wonderful to see.
Wow, that's awesome. So I know you've designed this book for families, right? You
Mhm.
call it a family treasury of saints and seekers. So it's so great that you're sharing your family stories. So I'm going to ask you to share a little bit more of family
Mhm.
stories and talk about now being a mom, right? So you were a foster mom, right? You and your husband foster parents, and I know you later adopted, but that's got to be tricky because when you foster first, you don't know if you're going to end up adopting. You don't know if they're going to
Mhm.
leave you after a certain amount of time.
Mhm.
Obviously, your faith is important to you. You're wanting to pass it on to these children in your home, but not knowing like what's
That's
going to,
right.
right? So
That's
talk
right.
about that and how challenging that was, you know, participating in your faith and being a foster mom and then an adoptive mom.
We went from 0 to 3 overnight. We had a 9-month-old, a 2.5-year-old, and a 4.5-year-old siblings. That was our first and only
Wow.
foster assignment.
Wow.
They were siblings, and they had never been in a church before. They were very angry about having been placed in our house. They had never been in a
Mm.
church. So the first time I took her to church, I was actually still playing piano and cantoring for the masses. And my son spent the entire time wailing into the microphone. So we said, okay, I'm not going to be able to do that anymore. And we went to a different church. So the very first Sunday that we wound up at this church, we led the kids up and I went forward to receive the Eucharist and to get the children's blessing. And my son reached up and punched the priest right in the midsection because the priest reached down to bless him.
Yeah.
And he punched him right in the breadbasket. And
Oh,
I heard the people behind me going, "You rotten brat, blah, 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 blah." So I took him up later. I took Christopher up later to introduce him to the Father Will. And I said, Father, I'm sorry. Christopher hasn't learned yet that when a man reaches out to him, that he's going to be kind and touch him with kindness.
mm-hmm.
And so I just wanted to introduce you to my foster son. And from that day forward, every time Christopher went forward, he would get down on his knees and look him in the eyes and he would pat him on the shoulder. There, there, buddy. And so Christopher learned that this big man in the scary vestments was not going to hurt him
Mm.
and that he could trust him. And so that was the first step. The next step, though, one of the books, I don't know, Amy, if you ever had this experience as a writer, but sometimes things get cut from
Oh,
books
yes.
that maybe
Yeah.
we like and maybe we just hadn't. So one of my very favorite stories got cut from the book, but the cover is based on this thing. And what happened was when the first kids first came to us, as you said, I didn't know if they were going to be with us how long or whatever. And so one of the things I really wanted to teach them was about their angel, who is with them
Mm.
everywhere they go and never leaves their side. And so after a couple of weeks of taking them to mass, I said to the kids, there is one time when your angel very briefly goes away from you, and it's when we're sitting at mass. Because when we're sitting in mass, heaven and earth come together, and the angel wants to go worship with the other angels. And he can only
Mhm.
go if you give him a good offering to bring to Jesus. And so if you're singing, if you're sitting still, if you're being good at mass, that's a good offering that he can take to Jesus. But if you're bad and you drop Cheerios, you make noise, or how mommy has to take you out, your angel's sad. He can't go worship with the other angels. He has to stay with you. So we need to make sure that we have a good offering to give that the angel can give to Jesus. And it worked like a charm. That's the kids.
This
All I
is
have to
great
do is go
parenting
like,
advice. Heidi, you need to like trademark this or something. I don't know. This is fantastic.
so from that day, all I'd have to do is go, are you making a good offering for your angel? And they would sit up and they would sing. And to this day, all I'll do is give them a look and go like this, and they start singing, because And it's not just a story, it's true. When heaven and earth come together, we are never closer to heaven than we are during the Eucharist. And so teaching them that and teaching them to see with eyes of faith and recognizing that heaven is as close as our next birth, and getting them to see heaven, getting to see Mass from the heavenly perspective. How can you be bored at Mass once you understand what it truly is, how
Mm,
close Jesus is to us, how much he wants to heal and teach and love on us? That's something that as parents, we have a profound privilege to be able to communicate that to our kids. But first, we have to make sure we believe it ourselves.
yeah. Yeah. Amen. Well, I think this book is really great. I loved how you organized it that, it's short passages. You can read them. I mean, I read it on my own. You don't have to read it with a family. You can read it on your own. But I
Yeah.
love that you did write it in such a way that people can read it like at the dinner table
Mhm.
or at breakfast in the morning. And then there's little questions that they can discuss or points of reflection that they can talk about, and then a little prayer that can be prayed together then. So I think the format's really great. I think it's going to share a lot of great Eucharistic stories with other people. So tell everybody where they can find the book and where they can learn more about you.
Sure. Well, if you want to find more of the book, it's available, of course, through Our Sunday Visitor, through Amazon, through wherever you get your favorite Catholic books. It's available all these places. The easiest way to reach me, ultimately, I'm hoping to get a YouTube channel that will have some of these Eucharistic stories. But for right now, the best way to reach me is on my website, HeidiSaxton.com, which is Life on the Road Less Traveled. If you have any adoptive or foster kid parents out there, I also have a lot of information about adoptive and foster parenting. So if that's of interest to you, go and check that out as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming in, Heidi. It was so good to connect with you again, even though we didn't actually see each other at Congress. Jesus knew. It's okay. Amy and Heidi are going to chat on Monday night. It'll be fine.
Thanks so much, Amy. This was a lot of fun.
All right. Take care, Heidi. God bless.
God bless.
All right. Well, I'm so grateful for Heidi for coming on my show. And it's always great to talk with my editors. Actually, the editor for Sweet Jesus at Juniette, I did see her at the Eucharistic Congress. She stopped by during my book signing at the Ave Maria Press booth. So now, within just a couple of days span, I got to see editors from both of my teachers' books. By the way, have you ever noticed that you are really listening to two people who love books and writing when both of them are sitting in front of a wall of bookcases behind them? I noticed that while Heidi was talking today. Okay, you tell we are both big book lovers. Yeah, just a few, and this is just a smidge of my collection here behind me. Anyways, thanks for joining me again on Cath-Lit Live. If you are watching this on YouTube, make sure that you like and subscribe. If you're watching this later on Instagram, glad you got to see it on Instagram, but you can see these sooner if you follow me on YouTube. So head on over there. And until next time, I'm just going to wish you all happy reading.